I think there's a lot of good ideas here. I do
Mhm.
think that I like the way the process has gone. I don't have all the information yet. I've reached out to the school board president, Jim Boucher, who's been on my program a number of times, and he said, "Well, wait till the end of the week. This is all want to get some response from members of the
Mhm.
board and members of the school administration, and then come and talk about it and talk about the next steps." But I do think there's a lot of positivity here because ultimately, from what I have been able to gather, that the status quo is not an option.
Districts are having to go to local referenda. Explain what's happening in Wausau, please.
Yeah, it's actually part of what's been a larger process that's on for the last couple of years. It started off with some of the discussions about merging the two high schools. We have Wausau West and Wausau East high schools,
Mhm.
and in terms of trying to talk about some lower enrollment numbers, obviously some financial numbers that don't add up. The thought was going to merge the two high schools and also lead to some changes involved with the middle school and the junior high schools here in Wausau. And they went through a process that went very quickly. And I think the process was a main factor that was led to some of the problems. And ultimately, initially, the school board voted to merge East and West. And by next fall, we would have been back to a Wausau high school, which was the case until about 1971.
Mhm.
But then there was a lot of backlash, and it really did get pushed from the community at large. The board came back. They voted again after a month or two and said, "No, we're not going to do that." We've gone
Mhm.
back to the Wausau East, Wausau West high schools. The junior high schools and the middle schools will remain the same as well. At this point, then they started to look at the elementary schools, and the, there is some major differences this process, and I remember this story basically was coming to heating up. I
Right.
guess as I started the show and we started Civic Media, and one of the things I talked about often was the process. So you have to have a good process to make it work. The process has been much better this time around. They had an elementary task force that's met, I believe, 9 times over the last number of months, and had 45 members. It was split. 15 people that are parents of school-age children, 15 residents of Wausau that do not have school-age children, and 15 staff members, teachers and staff members, part of this group. And they have been working on this. And uh, I think one thing to also indicate is the top criterion. There was a list of 5 different criterion.
Mhm.
The top criterion, fiscal responsibility. And
Right.
sometimes I think that obviously the fiscal aspect is vitally important, but at the same time, I do think that sometimes if it's just about fiscal responsibility, that's not a great thing either. But nevertheless, this group has come together and they released this week uh, their ideas.
Mhm.
And to underline, it's not a case where this is a done deal at this point, but it does feel like there is a momentum about it. And you mentioned
Right.
the fact that 4 of the elementary schools would be closing up. One thing I would note as well, though, that I mentioned this on the show yesterday, actually. I drive past one of the schools every day, basically,
Mhm.
Grant Elementary. And I've often thought it's a very cool looking school, but it's also a very old school.
Sure.
And one of the ideas is that some of these schools, frankly, are just really past their prime, and there would have to be some significant either renovations or new building. So it's completely understandable the fiscal aspect. But the idea is that there would be roughly about 25 to 30% of the school population, elementary school students in the Wausau School District would have to change attendance areas with this.
Right.
And there's a lot to get into.
Yeah,
I feel like
I no,
I'm
I
on a,
really
on a monologue here, but
no, I appreciate it.
there is, I think there's a lot of good ideas here. I do
Mhm.
think that I like the way the process has gone. I don't have all the information yet. I've reached out to the school board president, Jim Boucher, who's been on my program a number of times, and he said, "Well, wait till the end of the week. This is all want to get some response from members of the
Mhm.
board and members of the school administration, and then come and talk about it and talk about the next steps." But I do think there's a lot of positivity here because ultimately, from what I have been able to gather, that the status quo is not an option. There's
Hmm.
an interesting stat I saw in one of the stories. There's 1,100 empty desks right now within the Wausau School District in the elementary school area, and that number is going to grow. So the idea that some sort of consolidation is important, I think, is one that can be uh, uh, you know, proven to the folks in
Hmm.
Wausau. And that, of course, that's where it comes down to. There's where the problem was with the high school
Right.
consolidation plan, where I don't think they got the people involved early enough and in a way that felt like they were part of the process.
Right. I,
But I do see some of the numbers, and I do like the fact of the makeup of this task force that
right.
gave these recommendations. So I think there's a lot of positives, though I'm not willing at this point to say, hey, I'm all for it or I'm against it at this point. But I do think there's a lot of positives in the way that this has been done compared to maybe what happened a couple of years ago.
I think, yeah, I know, Chad, you just laid out very well the importance of civic media and our mission in each of these individual stations and as a network and being a statewide network. Because a story like this, taken, quickly with journalists under tight deadlines statewide, could say, oh, look, Wausau could close 4 schools. And a lot of hyperbole gets thrown out there. You just laid out where, look, part of it might be the fact that Republicans haven't fully funded 2/3 of state funding for local school districts, but also there are changing demographics. And to your point also that, maybe some of these buildings, maybe it is a greater tax burden to repair some of these buildings than it is to simply shut them down. Could that be a burden on local families? Yeah, it could. But these are more nuanced, detailed, factual things that takes a reporter, a journalist like yourself, being there and understanding this in the community. And I appreciate you taking time to lay this out. Tony off the YouTube channel has a question for us there, and it says, in a few years, the population of Wausau uh, grows.
If in a few
Oh,
years.
if in a few years the population of Wausau grows, will they be in a really tough situation? Is the lower enrollment now a temporary situation? Again, Chad, you're a native up there. What are the trends you're seeing?
Well, as part of this study, as it shows that there are 1,100 empty desks spread throughout the 13 Wausau elementary schools right now. Their projections actually have that number growing to about 1,300 by the year 2027. So that has actually been part of the discussions. That the
Mhm.
trends are that it's not going to be a case where some of those desks are going to be filled in the next few years. Actually, some of those desks are going to be further emptied in the next couple of years. So
Oh,
I do think that the future trends are something that have definitely been looked at by this task force.
yeah. Gonna have you come back much sooner. It's been way too long to continue to talk about this. You have about 1.5 minutes left. Give us a quick what's hot in the high school sports world in central Wisconsin.
I wanna I something last night. We had just a wonderful experience last night. I was over at the Marathon Park Ice Arena. Stevens Point is the #1 ranked hockey team in the state right now. They
Hmm.
came and played Wausau West, and these are been the 2 best teams in the Wisconsin Valley Conference for many years. It's early in the season. It's a Tuesday night. It's December, and that place was packed to the gills. I mean,
Wow.
it was like every seat was filled. They were standing room around the boards. It was such an energy, and it comes down to, and I was talking about this earlier this morning. We love the pack. We love the
Hmm.
Badgers. We
Hmm.
love the professional college teams in our state. But boy, when you have an opportunity to be with folks from our communities, people from Stevens Point came
Yeah.
down to Interstate 39 to be there, to see everybody for this kind of matchup, to have that energy, to have just and then a wonderful game, a 4-3 game that went right down to the wire. I just think that sometimes we get focused on the bigness aspect of it as opposed to the micro here where we have a high school
Amen.
matchup. But I think same thing with what we do. We focus on our communities, and I thought it was a great night for the community.
Amen. I appreciate it. Well said. It's part of what makes Wisconsin great. It's what brings us together. Our public schools, our communities. Chad Holmes, you can listen to him every morning from 8 until 10 on WXTO and on the Civic Media app, and you can catch him around the state doing a great job in high school sports. Thank you, my friend. We appreciate you.
Thank you too, Todd.